I was planning to do a book. When I put yours down, I thought, you know what? Someone's got to set the record straight here.
Mics are hot to the audience, just so you know.
Oh, great.
Good evening and good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Susan Christofferson, and I am a professor of finance at the Rotman School. And I am particularly proud to say that I hold the William A. Downe BMO Chair in Finance. So thank you for tuning in to our live stream this evening. Although we are meeting virtually, we wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We also stand in solidarity with the ongoing efforts to dismantle systemic racism and discrimination. So tonight, I have the great pleasure of introducing two remarkable men and our guest speakers for this evening, Tony Comper and William Downe, Bill Downe. While both men almost need no introduction, given their extensive philanthropic and leadership roles both within Canada and globally, I do want to take a few moments to highlight some of their amazing accomplishments. Tony had an incredible 4-decade-long career at the Bank of Montreal, which culminated with his appointment as CEO of the BMO Financial Group in February of 1999. He also served as chairman from July 1999 to May 2004. Throughout his career, Tony has served on a number of boards and committees, including the boards of Spectra Energy Corporation, Houston, Catalyst, International Advisory Committee at the Li Ka-shing Knowledge Institute, St. Michael's Hospital, just to name a few. In 2010, Tony received the Order of Canada, together with his late wife, Elizabeth, whom he founded FAST, a new initiative to combat anti-Semitism in Canada. He holds honorary degrees from the University of Toronto, Mount St. Vincent University, the University of New Brunswick, Hafe University, and we are also very proud to recognize that he is an alum of St. Michael's College at the University of Toronto. Today, Tony will be interviewed by Bill Downe, his friend. He's actually said he's his best student and colleague from the Bank of Montreal. Bill also spent a long and distinguished career with the BMO Financial Group, starting with the Bank of Montreal in 1983 and holding a variety of senior management positions in Canada and in the United States. Bill served as the CEO as well, taking over the position from Tony in 2007 and stepping down in 2017. Today, he serves on the board of Loblaws Companies, Manpower Group, the Social and Economic Policy Advisory Board of RAND Corporation. As well, he has held numerous board positions in non-for-profit organizations. Some examples include St. Michael's Hospital and the United Way. Bill is also a member of the Order of Canada, recognized in 2017 for his many contributions to Canada. He holds a BBA from Wilfrid Laurier University and multiple honorary degrees from several universities in Canada. I am so proud to say he is also an alum of Rotman's MBA program and recipient of Rotman's Lifetime Achievement. So our speakers share many things. They are both alum of the U of T, past CEOs of BMO, and members of the Order of Canada. I think we are in for a real treat tonight, and I'm eager to hear them share their thoughts on Tony's new book, Personal Account, 25 Tales of Leadership, Learning, and Legacy from a Lifetime in Montreal, followed by some live questions from the audience that I will help moderate. So if you have a question, I really want to encourage you, while the discussion is going on, to send it to us while you're listening to the discussion. So visit www.slido.com and enter in the event code, COMPER, C-O-M-P-E-R. Or you can use the Slido link posted on the YouTube chat. For those of you who paid to attend the live stream, you will receive a hard copy of personal account after today's event. And for everyone else, I highly encourage you to get a hot copy of the book, digital or physical. I'm sure you're in for a great read. So with that, I want to extend a very warm welcome to Tony and to Bill for being with us this evening and sharing their time, their thoughts, and their wisdom. So thank you both for joining. I'm going to turn over the virtual stage to you both. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you, Susan, very much for your very, very generous comments and your warm welcome. Very much appreciated. And by the way, thank you for everyone who's in attendance. Very much appreciated. Welcome, everyone. And I hope you find it interesting. The format is supposed to be a Q&A to some degree, with Bill posing questions and I attempting to answer them. However, those of you who know Bill and I know that it might be a little bit different than that. However, that will remain to be seen. Let me just start, though, by saying that I'm sure Bill joins me in thanking our successor, Daryl White, for arranging such a spectacular quarter to provide for an introduction to this session. Thank you, Daryl. He's busy right now, probably extolling the virtues of our quarter with the analysts. Okay, so with that in mind, over to Bill. Bill, how would you like to start the proceedings here?
Well, thanks, Tony, and thank you as well to Susan for convening this session. Well, I'm going to get to some questions almost immediately, Tony, but I want to thank you first for writing the book and agreeing to do a fireside chat. I think it's going to bring the book to light. And as you said, there's many BMO past and present colleagues who are joining us, and I know they're really interested in the context you're going to provide, as well as all the Rotman students and alumni. It is a very good day to have the conversation about legacy and the consequences of leadership that go well beyond your own career. And you just made a comment about Daryl, and it occurs to me when you say that as proud as we all are of our individual achievements, we're often more excited about the next generation and how they built on our legacy. So I think you're right. Today's earnings release with a 16% year-over-year growth in pre-provision pre-tax earnings and a 12% common equity tier 1 ratio must make you think of Daryl as your favorite descendant. Now, I know for a fact that you own a lot of shares too, so it wasn't a bad day on a personal level for you. And it's a nice note for this conversation. So let's turn to the book. For those of you who haven't picked it up, I'd recommend it as a very good read. And Tony, you've always been a deep thinker, the broad range of interests, and that does come through in all 25 chapters. Some readers may not have experienced your sense of humor, but it's also broad ranging and deep. So let's start with the cover in my first question. How long have you been thinking about this title? And does it amuse you as much as it amuses me?
Well, I think that was kind of an oblique question, Bill. So thank you very much for that and for providing that intro. Actually, it was quite an interesting story. I mean, you just hit the start button there, and this could be like a 25-minute thing, but I don't think Susan will allow that. She told me that she's got the kill button there right at her fingertips. And if we get too much off track, she's going to hit the kill button, and then Daniel's going to come on and give us a 35-minute lecture on high finance, which being an adjunct of and a student of Susan's. So there we go. Anyway, long story short, I didn't want the book to be When Tony Was 3 kind of a memoir. I find those not very interesting. But the other thing too that influenced it was I wanted to leave behind, after 40 years at the bank, what my experiences were and what successes, failures, things that worked, things that didn't work, and how to structure that. And when I was in university, of course, I majored in English literature, and then I spent a year in graduate school studying English literature, which is a terrific preparation for banking. And that's not a joke, actually. It really is, because you learn a lot about human nature and banking. Among many things, it's a lot about human nature. But when I was chatting with a couple of friends, in particular, a close friend of mine who was also a former colleague of the bank, I used to regale all my little stories that I've accumulated over a lifetime. She said, that'd be a good handle to use for the structure of the memoir. Why don't you tell your 25 tales talking about your experiences in the bank and doing it in that? I thought, that's great. So that was it, cut and run. And then my colleague, Bruce Dobigan, who's co-authored the book with me, interviewed me on all of the 25 little stories that I had. And he put decent language and literature and expurgated, deleted, and things of that nature, and turned it into the book. And there we are, suite et fin.
Well, that's great. And you asked me earlier if I was, after reading your book, was I inspired to write one myself? And I haven't been, except that now I have a title. Mine will be Commercial Accountant. So, Tony, let's talk a little bit about the very beginning. You majored in English Lit at St. Michael's College here at the U of T. You played the bass guitar in a band. I know you considered the priesthood at one time. What on earth made you decide to join the Bank of Montreal?
Well, that was a bit serendipitous, actually. It's a long story. I'll make it short. What happened was when I was 16 and my dad decided that I was having too much fun, he decided it was time for me to get out to work, and he leaned on his bankers at the time, one of which was the Bank of Montreal, to get summertime employment. So lo and behold, I started as a messenger at King and Young branch of the Bank of Montreal, and every summer, all through my university education, I went back and did my messenger duties, trotting up and down Bay Street. And it was a great learning experience. I learned the business from the bottom up. And then when I got out of graduate school and I was kind of looking around at what to do, I thought, well, you know what? The bank's been a pretty good place to work. There's nice people and it's a good business. And, it's all about customers and things of that nature. Well, I'll kind of sign on there and do a couple of years there at the bank, and then I'll think about where to go from there. I had been accepted at U of T Law School. After a second year in university, you could do that in the Jurassic time when I was a student at university. You could get into law school after second year. You had to have marks, but then you could do that. Well, then I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. But that was kind of 40 odd years ago, and life just carried on, and every experience I had led to one really entertaining experience after another, and that's the story.
I've had the benefit of talking about issues in the bank in the context of what happened on other occasions, and I know that you had the chance to work in a big branch. You learned a lot about the practicalities of many of the things we do. You had a chance to work in different locations. But in the early days of the career, what was it like? What did it feel like to be in the Bank of Montreal when you joined us in Montreal?
Well, actually, when I joined, Bill, it was in Toronto, and I was at King and Young branch. And in those days, this is pre-computers, right? So I'm going back to Jurassic time again. And but so the Bank of Montreal at King and Young was kind of like the go-to branch, arguably the number 3 branch in all of Canada. And we had 100 people on staff, if you can imagine, 100 people on staff in a branch bank. And so it was very large, and we were the comprehensive provider of banking services to the investment industry at the time. All the securities dealers, we were the go-to bank actually in Toronto for all the security dealers in downtown Toronto. And so because it was such a diverse branch, and because it was such a large branch, comprehensive in nature, we had every single function in the bank. So every summer, after the first couple of years as a stint as a messenger, they started moving me through all the different departments. So I learned securities handling, liabilities, foreign exchange, doing swap deposits, and the whole gamut. And so I was literally learning the banking business back in the days when you could actually stick your finger into it and really touch the basics of large foreign currency swaps and things of that nature, and actually do the calculations yourself, as opposed to just hitting a couple of buttons on the computer. And so that was a great understanding. And then the bank, lo and behold, when I left university, they had just started for the first time hiring university graduates on a formal basis. That's 1967, not that long ago. And they had started something called the Special Development Program. So I said, okay, put my hand up. How about if I sign on for that for now? And they said, okay, but you know what, Tony, it's now July the 15th. The program started in June, and we really don't know whether you'll be up to like catching up to all the other kids that are on the program. Not realizing, of course, that I'd spent 6 summers in every diverse function of the bank. And so that was a little bit easy. Got through that fine, and then I just started the basics, posting from branch to branch and winding up in my career, early career there, back at King & Young in the credit function, where I was a credit officer, which is lots of fun. It goes on from there, but I'll pause there, Bill.
Well, now, the one thing that I do recall from many of our conversations is how much transformation resulted from the time you were in technology and the roles you played there. How did you get from the branch level experience that you had into a role where you eventually became leader of technology in our firm, and what was it like in those early days? What kinds of things in technology were you working on?
It was fascinating, actually, and the learning experience there, Bill. I'm glad you asked that question. That's a great question, because one of the themes of the memoir, and one of the things I really enjoyed about the bank was it was such a diverse set of learning experiences, and quite frequently, at least in my day, and I think to some degree even today, the bank is kind of regarded as, oh yeah, kind of a pedestrian job. You do that, and you work in the, you punch computers, and you do a few transactions and make a few loans, and da 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 da, and you trot on. But it really is such a diverse collection of experiences. And I went on from King & Young, lo and behold, halfway through what was supposed to be a 5-year program to become a branch manager. I got tapped on the shoulder, invited to go to Montreal for a job interview in the Human Resources Department. Well, that didn't exactly appeal to me until they explained that it was a much higher job grade and a better salary and would look an awful lot better on your resume than just being a branch banker. That attracted me then when they put the case that way. I wound up in HR department, believe it or not, in a small department, working, Bill, with our colleague, Matt Barrett, and Harriet Stairs, who was head of HR. But my job was to help the bank hire young people to staff up the newly formed computer department to build the revolutionary online banking system that for its day was ahead of anything else in the finance industry. And I'm not putting too fine a gloss on that, I don't think. And so I was working away at that. And therefore I was working with a lot of younger people, men and women, who were coming in and being computer programmers. The bank, and this is another theme, Bill, that you and I have shared, was always very big, and a big theme that characterized the bank was its commitment to education. And we had started a training program for computer programmers. 6 months, you went in there on full salary, and you became a computer programmer. And being attracted to the environment and the people I was working with, I put up my hand and talked to my mentor, a brilliant young man by the name of Neville Shevloff, and said, Neville, I think I'd like to switch careers and actually come into the computer department. This looks like the wave of the future in banking for sure, and everywhere else as far as I can see it. He said, well, to get into the programmer training school, you have to take the Wolf test and logical reasoning ability, get at least 90%. So I'm a little bit intimidated by that. But anyway, did that, passed the test, got into the computer programmer training school, 6 months of learning, pop out of the toaster comes a newly formed computer programmer. And that started my career, the early days of which were programming, putting together the online banking system, and working with a lot of really, really interesting people. And that started us on the wave of my familiarity, my love of technology. In fact, some of the jobs I had in those days were some of the best job experiences that I've had my entire banking career. So I became a certified, actually I was a systems programmer, not an application programmer. And the systems programmers were the geeks of the world. And sad to say, I'd probably fit in neatly into that environment. Anyhow, that started the wave, Bill. And I've loved technology and its application to the financial industry ever since.
What was it about that particular area that catapulted you into the C-suite? When you think about it, you could have been a specialist for your whole career. What was the nature of what was going on there that accelerated your career advancement?
That's a hard question, Bill, and I think it's because another motif of the book is when young people ask me today, Bill, and you probably have the same experience, when we're talking to young people coming into the bank, the first question is like, what do I have to do? What's the checklist of me to get a hold? I want to go ahead. I'm aiming to be the CEO of the bank, and like, tell me the 5 things I have to do and the 5 jobs I got to have and the things of that nature. Rattle off this laundry list, and to some degree, I won't fault our educational system because I think it's excellent, but to some degree, the young people start off with that kind of mindset that how do I get ahead and do this and do that and everything else. And my own experience, and I think yours as well, is if you just do an uncommonly good job of whatever they ask you to do, the rest will look after itself. Because all organizations look for people that are really dedicated to trying to excel at the job of work that they're given to do. So after having had too much fun in the technology department, the bank decided I was having too much fun, so they immediately swapped me out and moved me into retail marketing head for the bank, which came as a great shock because I knew absolutely nothing about marketing in the bank. And they said, well, that's a good start. And so I did that. And then they gradually, I was only there for 6 months. Then they discovered that I really didn't know anything about marketing. And they moved me right out of there and into the Treasury Department and several other things.
That's fantastic. I did hear that it's possible to get promoted upstairs. It never occurred to me that it happened that fast. I want to take a little bit of a side trip here. We're going to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a theme that's on the front of almost everyone's mind today. In your early career, did you encounter extraordinary women colleagues that influenced your later views? That's something that's always a question I've always wanted to ask you.
Yeah, again, Bill, a terrific question, and you kind of hit the start button there. That could go on for another like hour and a half. But at the end of the day, the work that I was proud to be associated with, both with Matt and others, it was actually one of the proudest things I was ever able to achieve and to focus on when I was in the bank. But working in the computer department in those days, when we were hiring young people to work, there was no opportunity to really discriminate male, female, and anything else. You had to have 2 requirements to be a good person to fit into the computer department. You had to know something about programming computers, and you had to fog a mirror. And if you met those 2 fundamental requirements, you were hired on the spot because there was like a huge demand for this brand new technology. But working with, setting that aside, the little joke, working with young people, men and women, about equal number of men and women, occurred to me that, because I came from an experience where women were very good and underrepresented. And I had worked for some superb female managers, both at King and Young branch, where my boss was Joyce Acton, who was a terrific individual, sharp as a heck and a great banker. And then moving into the computer department, where I worked for a woman by the name of Maureen McGuire, who was had a graduate degree in mathematics from McGill University and a fantastic sense of humor, a great Irish person. And I won't, you can read the book. There's a couple of interesting little asides in there. That's a teaser there to get you to buy the book. Anyway, so my conclusion was, the bank is becoming more diverse. It's going to be an equal number of men and women, everything else. Spin the tape forward. Even now I'm in a senior position in technology, and the imbalance is the senior people in the departments were all men, and the more junior computer programmers and that were women. I'm going on like, what's wrong about this? So when Matt and I were handed the reins in 1989, I said to him, you know what, Matt? One of the things that's always amazed me is that when you look at the profile of our employees in the bank, 75% women, look at the top of the bank, virtually all males, maybe only 6% of women in the whole senior management ranks. Guess what, Matt? That's an economic problem. And he said, what do you mean, Tony? And I said, well, if you think about this, if it's true, and I think it is, and I think I can prove it, that the capabilities of women employees are equal to or better than our male employees on a kif-kif basis, then we are, in fact, now this is going to sound like a bit arcane, but we are under leveraging an enormous economic resource. And if we could tap the way of finding out how to level that and allow women, our women colleagues, to perform at the level that I'm going to prove they're capable of doing, and none of the myths that explain why this imbalance is there are true, think of the lift that that's going to give to the shareholders, to the bank, et cetera. And oh, by the way, think of the consequential benefit from a social justice point of view of figuring that out. We're solving 2 huge problems. one problem which is creating huge shareholder value and simultaneously creating something of value on a social benefit basis. Short story, but that's how it happened. And then there's a cute little story of how I went from breathing that into Matt's ear and thinking that would be wonderful and Matt will get on with it and da-da-da-da-da. And then how I wound up actually having to do something about it, which is, and there's a cute story also in the memoir, which I could regale you with now, but it'll chew up all the time that we have to talk.
Oh, there's a lot of really good gems in the book, but to follow along on this theme, you were motivated, your colleagues, including Matt, were motivated. What was the thing that if you like, started to break the glass ceiling because you had to do something? You said, I had to do something. What was the trigger that led us to where we went as a company?
So the trick was, and thanks, Bill, because I kind of stopped early in the conversation there, and I should have gone on a little bit, except I was a little worried about overrunning. But the next thing was, well, I will tell the little story. To heck with it. And so Matt and I had just been handed the reins of the bank. And of course, we went around, talking to all the employees, telling us why it was going to be wonderful under our management skill and leadership and everything else. And so we had a series of presentations of the staff, wound up at Roy Thompson Hall, 2,200 employees, most of them women. And Matt, of course, as you know, Bill, is like a phenomenal communicator. And he would sit on stage on a stool, a la Henny Youngman, and answer questions and do a great job. So hand goes up in the audience, woman, Mr. Barrett, when I look around this room and you look here, you see that it's all women and very few men like you and Tony at the front of the bank, and it's all men. What are you going to do about that? And he said, you know what? That's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked it. And I'm glad to announce that Tony Comper, I've named as head of a task force that's going to focus on solving that problem. And I'm kind of looking around like, what? Led to the start of the task force on the advancement of women in the bank. And I now had the golden opportunity to disprove the 5 conventional wisdoms that purported to explain why women were held back and were not performing at equal levels in the bank. We took a year, demonstrated because we had a wonderful HR database with lots of facts in it, and dispelled the myths that women didn't have as good education, they had as good or better, including MBAs and everything else. Women didn't put as much time in the bank, they just married and had kids and quit. Wrong. They had average time on the job equal to or greater than men. 3, their performance levels may not have been because they didn't have as advanced education. Wrong. Performance levels were equal or better than men at most positions in the bank. And that kind of poof, went all the myths. So now you're down to what's going on around here. And you come to the conclusion that it was, don't like to use this term, but I will, systemic discrimination. Not intentional. I'm not blaming people, but rather the model of people like to hire people like themselves, and they feel more comfortable in that kind of environment and things of that nature, and that perpetuates this kind of thing. Published the report demonstrating that this was this and what we could do to break those myths and to kind of set the agenda to move forward. Then, of course, everybody's trot said, oh, yeah, you're going to have quotas, And I said, no, performance will always be the determinant on this, but I want to make sure that women have the equal opportunity for the promotions and that they don't get bypassed in that process. Then the next big thing we did was make the report public so that the world could see it. Objection to that, because, Tony, this is a competitive advantage. Do we really want to expose what we're doing? I said, of course we do, because we think we've got a handle on this, and that's good for us, but it's also good for the world of work in general. And of course, shortly thereafter, we were able to move the representation of women in the bank from 6% at the time to 35%. And then a young man by the name of Bill Downe kind of picked up the cudgel and moved that along. And Bill, I think you've now got that, or you had that level by the time you were CEO, up to an even higher mark than that. And our colleague Daryl has kind of carried on that tradition, if I can characterize it that way. And Bill did a wonderful job of taking on the leadership and doing a great job on that. Sorry to go on, but it's a favorite topic.
It's nice of you to say that, Tony. You set the tone, and it was a collective effort in the bank, as you said, to go to let higher levels and be more specific and broad the agenda. When I joined the bank, it was a long time ago, as it was for you. It was made very clear to me that there was a multi-stakeholder responsibility that came with it, and you've spoken at length about shareholder value, created an enormous amount of shareholder value in your time with the bank, and specifically the decade you were chief operating officer and the near decade that you were CEO. You, in your book, you talk a lot about the customer, and I invite readers to absorb that, because there's some very important content there. And you've just been talking about the importance of employees, and how do you maximize the value of the intellectual capital that exists in the talent base of the company. And you've been quite eloquent about that. The last one that was always front and center in our discussion was the community. You set a tone, I think, around stewardship and the bank's involvement in the community. Why was that so important, and how did that play out?
That story goes back a long way, Bill, and I think the underlying theme there, and I must admit, like, Bill has been the exceptional practitioner of focusing on community involvement and carrying that banner and doing a wonderful job on it, and also a focus on the employees and focus on involving the employees and things that we do, which is a learning to all of us. But in my case, the bank has always been a relationship business. Oh yeah, and we got number crunching, we do this thing, and we lend money, and we look after customers, we hopefully do a great job for them and everything else. But it's about relationships, and it goes from, in my case, the story that I love is the story of my grandmother, who came to Canada with her husband in very poor circumstances, lived in Cabbagetown in Toronto, no money, 6 kids, Christmas coming, no money for Christmas. Got a dividend check from her brother, who was well-to-do in England. Guess what? It was a dividend check from the Canadian Pacific Railway, drawn, of course, on the Bank of Montreal, which we financed and got started. And the dividend check was in pounds sterling. She walked from Cabbagetown to the Yonge and Queen branch of the Bank of Montreal, presented the check, and the manager came out and he said, "Mrs. Comper, you're an honest woman. The check, of course, is undoubted, because we're the bankers for the Canadian Pacific Railway. I will cash the check for you on one condition, that you promise always ever to deal with the Bank of Montreal." She said, "I will, sir." Trotted across the street to Eden's, got a turkey and all the stuffings and presents for the kids, and went home and had a wonderful Christmas, thanks to the Canadian Pacific Railway, to the Bank of Montreal at Yonge and Queen Street. And lo and behold, that started it. The point of the story is a relationship business. It always has been, and it's been exceptionally important in the way in which we developed the bank under my leadership, under Bill's leadership, and again, continuing under Darryl's leadership. And that, I think, is very important, because we are in every single community across this land. And we can only be as successful as the communities in which we live and work. And therefore, it's very important to us to do well in every single one of those communities across the country. And that only came to roost one time when we were up Canada Wonderland, which is an entertainment park in the city of Toronto, up north of Toronto. And we used to get it on the day before they had a formal opening as kind of a dry run. And so we'd invite all of our colleagues, and they in turn could invite their cousins and relationships and aunts and uncles and nephews and nieces. And standing on the stage, Matt and I were there, and I'm looking out, and there's like 34,000 people looking at us, some 20% of whom were bankers, and the others were their associated relatives and everything else. And I said to Matt, "You know what, Matt, look at the responsibility here. We are carrying the responsibility of doing a good job and performing, because look at all the people that are dependent on us. And then, but the knock on of that is not just them, but their friends, their relatives, all the communities in which we live." Great business to be in.
Well, Tony, I think that's permeated the organization in a way that has made it a very satisfying place to have a career. But you've also projected it in your personal life. And I was thinking about this as I went through the book. Your late wife, Elizabeth, was your working partner for your whole career. And I know she inspired you in many ways. One of the causes that you took up together was fighting anti-Semitism. And I wondered if you could just take a minute and tell us a little bit about that and where it went.
Yeah, interesting, Bill. And again, that was an important thing. And of course, Liz, and you can tell that in the book, because there's a whole chapter, at least actually almost 2 chapters devoted to Liz. Liz was the North Star, and not just in my career, but also in my life. And one day, this is going back to like 2004, 2005, And there had been an outbreak of anti-Semitic incidents in Toronto and Montreal. Those of you who are Montrealers will be familiar with the burning of the Talmud Torah School in Montreal. And Liz was watching two young Jewish men, probably, I don't know, 12 or 13 years of age, being interviewed on TV, who were obviously terrified at how could this happen in Toronto, Montreal, at this day and age in a country like Canada, and obviously scared. And she said, Tony, we have to do something about this. I was in the middle of shaving at the time, but that never stopped Liz from coming in with her list of ideas and things I had to do that day, and which I dutifully accepted. The best guarantee of a long-lasting marriage is the inevitable phrase of "yes, dear." And but kidding aside, I said, I agree with you. And so we started to think about what to do. Liz was an educator. She had taught in Toronto, and then she taught actually in a Jewish private school in Montreal, among other things, before going on to get a master's degree at McGill University to become a children's librarian. But in her early days, she was a grade 1, grade 2 teacher. And we finally landed on an intervention. Suggestions were made of doing something like Crime Stoppers. And well, okay, those are all well and good. I'm not demeaning those, but that isn't going to solve the problem. And given the bank's commitment to education always, and that imbued on me, and Liz being an educator, she said, Tony, the only way that you can ever hope of breaking that cycle is by focusing on education, and particularly at young people, like let's say grades 6, 7, and 8, who are like important to give them an alternative narrative that they might have heard it at home. All forms of hate, I believe, are transmitted in families. And so to intervene and give them an alternative narrative that they may be hearing at home or in the schoolyard or someplace else when they hear issues of intolerance or anti-Semitism or elsewhere, that's an important thing. So we collaborated very closely with some colleagues from the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, designed a curriculum to be used in schools by teachers, wanted only one version, so it had to conform to all the academic requirements and the curriculum requirements of all the provinces, French and English, all the boards, all across the country, and including the far north. That took about a year. Started the program to educate kids in grade 6, 7, and 8. By the way, the materials are available online. I commend anybody to go in and take a look at them if you want. There's now a Mark II for kids in high school. Anyway, program started off slowly, 2005. To date, that program has been delivered to 4.2 million young Canadians in 22,000 schools across the country, and continues to grow and develop. I thought it would be a transitory thing for maybe 18 months and the problem would be behind us. Sadly, I'm sad to say, the problem has become even worse and requires even more focus. And now another version for high school kids. And it's great learning, by the way. And my friend Larry Tannenbaum, who's written a lot of nice things in the memoir, allowed me to put the arm on Kyle Lowry to do one of the video introductions to one of the sessions in his Raptors uniform, talking about diversity. And it's just great stuff. I commend you to watch it. Anyhow, I've gone on too far on that, Bill. Sorry.
No, I think it's, you know what, it was an extraordinary venture, an inspired venture, and it had a tremendous impact through a life that you had defined. But what I'm impressed by is that you've continued to work on this past your retirement, and I am interested in what the final transition has been for FAST, because it's something that was extraordinary watching its creation and the evolution.
Yeah, well, more recently, we have merged with another organization out of Winnipeg called the Canadian Institute for Studies in Antisemitism. A young woman, not Jewish, and by the way, just a sidebar, when we started our program, it was important to us that this be an initiative started by non-Jewish people. And I immediately, to start out with, put the arm on 30 of my closest friends in the business and the community in Toronto and Montreal to do three things. Lend me $10,000 to start the program. 2, be prepared to lend their personal names and the names of their organizations in one-page newspaper ads that we ran saying, we are not Jews and we will not stand for this. And that became the theme. Catherine Chatterley, the founder of the Canadian Institute for Studies in Antisemitism, is not Jewish, and she started a program after having become very interested in the subject by reading the story of Anne Frank, which intrigued her, and she started off on a long haul, finally got a doctorate from the University of Chicago in European Studies, and founded this institute, which publishes peer-reviewed learned periodicals every 6 months on the most recent developments in anti-Semitism. It was a natural marriage for us. And so we've come together, keeping our independent brands and doing what we're doing, but getting the benefits of working together on many initiatives. And that's where it stands right now.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's a fantastic extension of a long and very successful story.
The byline there, though, Bill, is, and I think this is a message that of all of us who are involved in community work, and you among others have been like paramount in doing that. Liz's motto was, one person can make a difference. And we're all too familiar with commentators on television and all that saying, well, the government should do this and the government should do that and everybody should do this. And Liz always said, yeah, but what can I do? And well, the proof of the pudding, of course, is the FAST Foundation, which means FAST means fighting anti-Semitism together. And one person turned into the program that has become.
Yeah, a wonderful legacy.
I'm just going to jump in here.
Susan wants to say something, but we agreed that we'd let her say something when we thought she should say something. So Tony, you get a vote. It takes 2 votes to put the mic back in Susan's hands.
Okay.
I'll vote in favor of that.
Okay.
Are you in favor of that?
Me too. Yeah.
Okay, Susan.
I'm going to hand it back over to you guys soon, because I've promised our wonderful audience that I would sort of interject with questions that they have for both of you, and you particularly, Tony. I think one of the things that sort of come up from some of our audience is really, what are some of the key opportunities and threats that you think that the Canadian banks are facing currently?
Yeah, what are the opportunities and threats? Well, the opportunities are manifest. As I said, it's about a relationship business, and to me, that's a never-ending business. And so the relationship might change in its nature. We do less transactions today. Fortunately for our employees and fortunately for our customers, we're not person dependent in doing transactions anymore, which allows us to do more value-added things like advising people on what they should be doing with their financial situation and everything else. The threats, I'm reminded of that great line of Harold Macmillan when he was Prime Minister of England back in the 1960s, and says, so what do you think you worry about most? And he said, events, good son, events. And so all of which is by saying is the future is somewhat unpredictable. Witness the pandemic environment that we're in right now. Who would have thought a year ago that a virus that just in some schools was downplayed, not necessarily among the professionals, but who would have thought that it would have turned out into being the massive impact that we've had? And therefore the bank, adapting to what our customer needs in that kind of environment, I think has done a remarkable job under Daryl's leadership in terms of responding to that. And I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating, together with our customers, generating very successful results as a result of helping our customers in this kind of a turbulent and tough time.
And so one of the things that has come up, you had mentioned this, you have a background in English, right? So what do you think would be ways in which people can prepare? Like thinking, you had sort of raised this earlier in your talk. As an educator, how should we be preparing people? You talk a lot about the importance of human nature and human contact. Should we be preparing people more to think about the customer? Is that sort of what's critical to succeed in this business?
Well, thank you, Susan. That's an excellent question. And the thing, and it's a chapter in the book, but the thing I always used to say to young people is when they would ask me, well, what's the most important skill to acquire? Is it like being able to do these second deviation on in derivatives or something else of that nature? And the answer is no. My straight answer, which comes to degree from my early education in the humanities, was the most important skill is interpersonal skills. And I always say that we're all in the sales business. That comes as a surprise. Certainly it became a surprise to the people in the technology business when I was in the technology business, but we're all selling. We're selling our ideas. We're selling what's important. We're selling what we want to get ahead. We're selling what works for people and what we think is going to benefit them. And that's probably the most important skill set. And by the way, you learn a lot about that by studying the humanities. I'm preaching my own book, of course, because that's what I studied.
Well, that's great to hear, because I know our Rotman Commerce program, we focus a lot on studying some of those humanities as well as part of their business degree. This is actually a question for both of you, which is, as CEO, what was your worst and best day? That's coming from our audience, not me.
That's over to Bill.
That's probably like buying a boat, right? No, that's not. I'm being facetious. You know, that's a question that bites as you reflect on it. I don't think there is one best and one worst, but I would say that the days that were best for me were the days when it came together and we did something that allowed a client of ours or a customer of ours to achieve more than someone might have expected was going to happen. And you know, that might have been in a commercial transaction where someone refinanced their business when they had been in difficulty, or they were able to expand their business, or I can recall being in a small house in a rather poor area of Milwaukee on the afternoon that there was a house closing for a family that was able to acquire a house during the financial crisis for $22,000 with a Bank of Montreal mortgage in order to do that. And the head of household, the lady who was head of household, said she had dreamed of being a homeowner her entire life and thought it could never happen. Those are the days I think that were, for me at least, the absolute best. And the days that were the worst were the days that we missed, where we didn't deliver where we might have, and we all felt that we might have let the side down. I think, you know, banking is a very personal business. That's the easiest thing. I mean, there's all kinds of events that happen, right, Tony? I mean, we lived in a world of externalities, and you know, you go home after something external happened that was beyond your power and think, well, shoot, that wasn't supposed to happen. But the best and the worst, I think, are more personal.
Susan, the interesting point there is when Bill talks about that exemplifies Bill and the way he used to operate. I mean, it's highly unusual for a senior officer like Bill to be out there actually talking to a customer about acquiring a house and doing something of that nature. And that's been kind of a hallmark of his career, in my experience in watching Bill operate, which I learned a lot from, was how to actually not delegate to somebody who's going to be out there doing first line, but actually get out there and talk to the customers and work with them on solving their problems. And that, more than anything else, I think is a hallmark of the relationship business, which is what he and I think would agree on is the essence of the business that we're in.
That's great. I have another question here, just about, you know, during the financial crisis, Volcker worried that the U.S. commercial banks were being run by people that didn't understand the banking business. Do you think it's more that people didn't understand the banking business, or that they were understanding it but taking advantage of the risks that were there?
Oh, that's a tricky one. But Bill was totally in charge during that thing and actually skillfully managed our bank out of that issue. But let him talk to that.
Well, I would say that it's very difficult to criticize a competitor without knowing what really is going on. I would say that our bank was hugely advantaged by the fundamentals that we worked very hard on in the 90s and the early 2000s around the valuation of risk, and an understanding that the human factor can only go so far, that banking and finance are also probabilities-based businesses. And I think that banks that invested heavily in risk measurement technology, who understood that there are real disciplines that go on, and it's really the combination of what we now refer to as data mining, data management, artificial intelligence, and judgment and experience that makes a successful bank. So, you know, in the crisis, we observed in some competitors that they'd over-indexed to marketing, or they'd over-indexed in pursuit of growth, and missed the point that it is all about customers and good customers. So, I think that's a very good question. I think probably worthy of another book, and probably the person who asked the question is working on just such a book right now, Tony. And you might get to make a contribution. We should follow up with Susan to find out who it was.
Yeah. So I have a question here, which you guys have already talked about, but what do you think? This is mostly about the I guess the diversity wanted in leadership. Do you foresee in the next 5 or 10 years that we're going to see a woman or a person of color leading one of the top 5 banks in Canada? We already have it. I think Laurentian and some of the others have moved in that direction. What is your view in terms of the progress that's been made along those leadership roles in banks?
Well, I happen to think that it will happen for sure, but it will be based not on forcing that to happen because someone is of a diverse background, but rather focused on performance and ability. And there's plenty of that in broad things. So there's absolutely no reason why that should not happen, as far as I'm concerned.
That's great. I have one which is really about the transition between Tony, you sort of handing over the reins to Bill in 2007. And, how did you learn from each other or navigate that transition?
Well, it was pretty easy, actually, because, Bill and I had worked more closely, actually, from the time that Bill became head of our investment bank. And of course, we were like hand in glove in terms of that. And we had, quite diverse views on some things, but we shared a lot in terms of, Bill mentioned just now, the focus on having our frontline officers being sufficiently expert in the area of managing risk and doing that kind of thing that they could respond directly to customers. And that was great. And so it was a pretty easy transition. And of course, the one thing that advantaged, I think, our bank was up until my recollection was we had kind of a mandatory retirement age for CEOs at 62 years of age, which is about after you'd done about 10 years worth of service at the top of the bank. And therefore, there was a very predictable time when that transition would occur. So it was a very easy thing to kind of psychologically prepare for both Bill and myself, and also all of our colleagues who kind of knew that there was a day going to come, and it was a fixed date in terms of Tony's going to hand on. And it was pretty obvious that Bill was going to be the successor. And therefore, I think it was a pretty easy transition. I haven't heard anything different from you or anybody else at the time.
No, Tony, it was, as you said, a successful transition because we had sat 30 feet from each other for 5 years and talked about all of the issues of the bank on a daily basis. I only recall 2 things that, though, on an anecdotal level that might stand out. One was that near the end, you started to tell me how many quarter ends you had done, how many times you sat in a risk management committee or an audit committee, and it was an extraordinary number of bureaucratic moments. And I took it from you that this was something that I was going to enjoy for a time to come. And so that was part of your hardening me to the responsibility. The other thing that was actually very good is you came out of your office with a binder and you said, now, listen, you have always pushed me about things you felt we should do or you wanted to do, and you're always impatient. Inside this binder are all of the authorities that you have and a description of what happens if you exceed those authorities. And I'm not going to be here anymore. So it's just you and the binder. And you handed it to me. And I thought that was great. It was a moment of revelation that there are some things that are codified and they need to be respected even as you want to change and evolve. I thought it was a very, very effective time in both of our careers.
It was one of the happiest days in my entire life, was to hand that binder over to Bill and see that the mantle had been passed. After I had attended, and I counted it up when I left the bank, I had attended 194 board meetings. And and that was a challenge. And Bill, of course, successfully rose to that occasion with eyes wide open at the time, I recall. You know.
Well, that's great. I think I've got, you know, it may be one of our last questions, but I think it's a good one. You know, what would you say is BMO's greatest contribution to Canada's history? I mean, you know, I've gone back, actually, I was very interested myself in sort of the financial institutions and the history, and remember going back and looking at the dividend payments for BMO, and I can't remember what year, you know, was it established, but obviously it's been, you know, an important part of building Canada. And so what do you think of as sort of its biggest contribution to Canada?
That's a very difficult question to answer. And I think the fact of the matter is, and it goes back to our roots, and the fact that we've been established in every single community across this country from a very early days and well in advance of a lot of our other competitors, and not to knock them, but we just started earlier. But we saw it as an important thing to be in every single community and all across the country, and financed the things that we thought were very important initiatives in terms of bringing the country together. Arguably the most important one of those, or the most notable one of those, was the Canadian Pacific Railway, that our colleagues, our previous colleagues, Lord Strathcona, who was the president of the Bank of Montreal, and his cousin, George Stephen, who became the president of the Bank of Montreal, actually almost to their detriment, understood brilliantly how the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway would bring the country together. And we went along with them. A little story in the memoir about as the engines would stop in the train to water up every 50 miles, because that's how long it could last on an engine full of steam. And we'd push off a bunch of lumber and set up a local branch of the Bank of Montreal. And so being there in all the communities across the country and understanding the value of the communities and why it was important for us to serve all of those communities was, to me, probably the most important contribution. Bill, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I know. I think that captures it, Tony. And I would even expand. I would expand it over the 200 years, 200 plus years since the founding of the bank. That's been in communities across North America. You know, our early presence in the United States, going back to right after the founding of the bank, has created a substantial footprint. And by behaving as Canadian bankers do, I think we've done a different kind of business, maybe a form of nation building or community building everywhere that we operated. And over those 2 centuries, beyond North America, so that the bank's presence in Asia, in Latin America, and in Europe has really had a similar form. And I think it's really a thread that runs through the history of the bank, and it does originate with enormous, I think, confirmation from the creation of Canada west of the Great Lakes, which is what the Canadian Pacific Railway was. It defined the 49th parallel. It's the reason why the West is Canada and not something else. So it does run through the fabric, and both Tony and I appreciate that question, because it is important to both of us.
And it's that, but I would also add to that, for example, another really good example is after the Great Fire in Chicago in 1871, Bank of Montreal, my understanding is the first financial institution to open its doors and serve the customers in the ravages that had occurred in Chicago at that point in time. So being there for the customers in good times and in bad, I think is another hallmark of that, Susan.
Well, that's a great, I think that's a great way to sort of tie up our discussions. And I think particularly now that we're facing a lot of different challenges with fintech coming in, and I think there's always going to be a role for those relationships that these banks have established and played an important role in our country. So I thank you both for your leadership that you've had in establishing in the, in the bank, and for such a wonderful opportunity to hear from you both. So thank you also to our audience who are joining us from probably different parts of the country and different parts of the world. So if you enjoyed today's live stream, you may be interested in another one we have coming up on Monday, March the 1st at 5 p.m. We're going to have the New York Times columnist and Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman will be discussing his best-selling novel or book, Arguing with Zombies, Economics, Politics, and the Fight for a Better Future. I'm glad I'm not moderating that one because I don't really like zombies. And he'll be discussing that with Rotman's interim dean, Ken Quartz. For full details, please register or look on our Rotman events website and register for the live stream. So with that, I'm going to close out the evening. And again, thank you all for being with us tonight. It's been a wonderful and very thought-provoking evening. And Tony, please, everyone go out and read the book. I think it's going to be a great read and a great opportunity. Thanks, Bill, for being here.
Is this an opportunity to do a little bit of marketing here?
Yes. Wonderful.
I'm not getting a commission on this, by the way.
That's the free one that I sent him.